All right, so today it's a serious topic. Okay, today we're going to talk about social and cultural effects on learning English. Woo, what does that mean? Okay, cultural. First of all, let's talk about culture. Culture and learning English. Culture is very important. If you're learning English, you need to learn something about the cultures of the countries where English is spoken, where it's a native language especially. So what does that mean? That means Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, etc. You need to know something about those cultures. And especially it helps if you're learning a specific kind of English. If you focus on British English. Of course, I focus on American English, meaning North American English, includes Canadian. Canadian and American English are quite close. So if you want to learn North American English, you really should learn something about the cultures of Canada and the United States. You don't need to become Canadian or American. You don't need to change yourself and your beliefs and your values. But you should have some kind of interest in the cultures. If you don't, well, you can probably still learn vocabulary and grammar in English, but it's going to be more boring. It's going to be more difficult. If you're excited about the culture, some part of the culture, it will help you a lot. My favorite example is a student named Seiko from Japan. I think I've mentioned Seiko before. Seiko's a fantastic English learner. Now, she doesn't necessarily know grammar. She's not necessarily better or smarter than other students, but she's learning English faster. Her accent is better. She speaks well. Why? What is her secret? Her secret is not really a learning method, actually. Her secret is an attitude. Her secret is that she's really, really interested in music and culture in the United States and England. In fact, she loves the Beatles. She's a maniac for the Beatles. Beatles, Beatles, Beatles. She loves the Beatles. She always talks about John Lennon and Paul McCartney. She reads books about the Beatles. She listens to Beatles music. And guess what? She's doing a lot of that in English. And she also is a musician herself. She plays music. She meets American musicians and talks to them. She has a strong motivation to learn English. And she's learning the real English because she's connecting with our culture. Now, she doesn't need to love everything about America. She might hate American politics, for example. She may hate George Bush. That's okay. I hate him too. But what's important is that she has some connection to real living people who are speaking English. So many students only focus on textbooks and CDs and exams and classes. And that's what English is to them. This is very common in Japan. I've taught in Japan, so I'm familiar with the Japanese situation. And a lot of Japanese people who are learning English, to them, English just means a test and a textbook and a boring class where they analyze the grammar of English like it was some kind of science or something. And that's what English means to them. English is dead for them. It is a dead language, like Latin. Because to them, there are no living people speaking English. Of course there are, but they're not connecting with them. That's how you make the language living. That's how you bring it alive. That's how you really add power to your English learning. You have to connect with real people or real ideas or real emotions or all of that. Real culture. That's what we're talking about. If you do that, suddenly English is alive. It's real. You're focused now on the ideas and the emotions and the information, and you're not focused so much on the vocabulary and the grammar rules and does the subject and the verb agree, blah, blah, blah. And the funny thing is, the strange thing is, when you focus on the information, when you focus on communication, when you focus on emotion and real people, you actually learn better because you relax and you actually start to learn the language better. Your pronunciation will actually improve just by changing your attitude. Your grammar will improve just by changing your attitude. Your vocabulary will grow just by changing your attitude. And your study methods will get better just by changing your attitude. And when I mean change your attitude, I mean changing your focus. Focus on connecting to ideas, connecting to information, connecting to people, connecting to emotions expressed in English. That's what you've got to do. It's the key. It's more important than what are called linguistic factors. Now, when I was getting my master's degree, we studied a lot about linguistic factors and non-linguistic factors. Linguistic just means language in this case. So linguistic factor just means factors or information or important points related to language. What does that mean? Well, it means linguistic factors means your study method. How do you study vocabulary, right? How do you study and learn grammar? Which textbooks are you using? What school are you going to? What is your strategy for memorizing new words? These are all linguistic factors, right? It's very much focused on the language, the pieces of the language, the pieces of English. But then there are other things called non-linguistic factors. And, scientists and linguists and teachers, they hate this part. They don't like it. They don't like to talk about it. They pretend it's not important. In fact, it is the most important part of learning English. What is non-linguistic factors? It means non-language factors, non-language parts. What does that mean? Well, it means emotion. It means your social situation. It means cultural issues. It means your attitude. It means your motivation. It means all your feelings about English. Those are non-linguistic factors, and in fact, they are the most important. Students and teachers and schools and researchers, they're all worried about the linguistic factors. Oh my God, what's the best way to teach the past tense? Right? How can I improve my grammar points? How can I get 2 more points on the TOEFL exam? Linguistics. But in fact, that's not the most important. If you have great motivation, if you have fantastic attitudes about English, if you are connecting with real people who speak English, or at least real ideas, real books, real movies that you are interested in, that you care about, your study method is not so important. You will learn English and you will improve. Even if you learn with a method that's not great, even if you're still using textbooks and studying grammar sometimes, if your attitude's great, if you're really excited about English, if you have a connection to it, an emotional connection to the language, you are going to improve, and you're going to improve faster than all those other people. Even people who use a great method, such as mine. Even people who, just joking, people who use my website, for example, Effortless English. They're not all going to learn at the same speed. And they're all using the same method, basically. Why? Well, some people are better with languages than other people, sure. But we can all learn languages. I think it's their motivation. I think it's their attitude. I think it's their connection. If they're really shy, for example, and afraid to communicate, because they're afraid of making mistakes, I must speak perfectly every time. Well, that's going to make them learn more slowly. Right? They're not going to communicate with other people. Because they're not communicating, they're not using English. And they're also not hearing more English, natural English. They're going to go slower. People who are not afraid, who are excited, they just want to talk. Oh, I love talking to people from other countries. This is so fun. And they just start talking and they make many, many mistakes. But you know what? They learn faster. Because they're practicing English and they're also hearing English from a lot of other people. And as they hear that English, they improve. They learn new words. They learn how to say something better, more correctly. Their grammar improves. Their pronunciation improves. And it's their attitude that is the key. I want to talk one more thing about this idea of non-linguistic factors, and that's from Dr. Stephen Krashen. We've talked about him before. Perhaps the most famous researcher in language learning. Certainly one of the most famous. And Dr. Krashen, he usually studies linguistic factors. He has a lot of theories about the best methods for learning a language, the best methods for teaching a language. So that's a lot of his research. However, Dr. Krashen also talks about, he says there are two parts. Number one is the method, an input-based method, lots of listening and reading and things like that. That's the number one, very important. But he says then the second thing, equally important, is belonging to a group. So social belonging, social connection. And there's not a lot of research about that part of it, to be honest. I don't know of much research about the non-linguistic parts, especially this social belonging idea, but it's very important. And even Dr. Krashen, whose most of his work focuses on methods and grammar and all this stuff, and I use his methods. I believe his research is really good. But still, even Dr. Krashen admits that at least 50% of learning a language, possibly more, depends on your social connections to the language. That means you belong to a group that uses the language. You belong to some kind of group. Now, that might be a group of native speakers. If you're living in America, that might be you belong to a soccer team that plays soccer every week, and they all speak English. Now you have a reason to learn English and to communicate with English. It's a more emotional, social reason. You'll learn better and faster now. Even if you don't change your study methods, even if nothing else changes, just by belonging to a social group, you're going to learn English faster and better. Interesting, right? But let's say maybe you live in Japan. And there are not many Americans in Japan, in your town. Well, that's okay. The magic of the internet. You can use Skype. You can find a group to talk to in English. Now, you can go to an English site where you can, quote, practice your English. Let's get on the site and let's practice our English together. If you're low level, that's a good idea. But if you're more advanced, if you feel comfortable chatting a little bit, I think it's not such a good idea. I think it's better to find a group that has the same hobby as you do or the same interest. For example, if you love the Beatles, find a Beatles group and chat with people about the Beatles. You'll still be using English, still practicing English, but you're not focused on English. You're not focused on the language and the grammar and is this correct and am I saying this correctly? Instead, you're focusing on a topic that you are very interested in, that you have some emotional connection to, the Beatles, and you meet other people from other countries who have the same connection. They also love the Beatles, and you get very excited and you talk about the Beatles and the past and their songs and what's Paul McCartney doing now, and you start using the language and you're not thinking about the language so much. You will start to improve faster, but you're not thinking about the language. It's automatic. Effortless. That's why I call it effortless English. Maybe you're not interested in the Beatles. That's okay. You're interested in something. Maybe you're a serious person and you're very interested in politics. And you're very worried about the Iraq War and world politics. Fine. Find a group that talks about politics. Connect with other people who talk about politics. It might take a little time. Look for blogs. Look for websites. Look for forums that discuss politics, international politics. Eventually, you will connect with other people, or you go to Skype, look for Skype casts about politics. Find other people who are interested in politics and talk with them in English. English is the world language. They don't need to be from America. They don't need to be from England. They could be from anywhere in Europe, anywhere in Asia, Africa, South America. It doesn't matter. Focus on the information, focus on the emotion, focus on the social connections. That is going to help your English more than anything else I talk about. All my talk about using methods and my point of view stories and all of that, it helps. But your attitude and your connection, social connections, cultural connections, emotional connections, they're the most important. All right, that's all for today's podcast. I hope you can find some people to talk to in English about topics you care about. All right, I'll see you next time. Good luck. Enjoy your English learning. Bye-bye.